Hi, everyone. This is Vicky Essebag and my friend Tara Gretton, and we are here with Power Verse number 38 today. And the question that we are posing today is, how do we support our young people when they're in distress? And Tara and I were talking about how this is a particularly difficult time for young people in schools because they've come back from the holiday. They're facing the second semester of the year. For high school students, there's a lot that is involved in second semester with exams and preparation for the school year end as well. And for elementary students, it's also coming back from the holiday where they've spent time at home. They've come out of that school routine, and now they have to get back into the structure and the pressure of that school routine. So we are seeing students in distress. And distress comes in different forms, right? When we talk about distress, we talk about sadness, worry, stress, all of those kinds of things. And of course, if you put those on a continuum, you can have lesser forms of distress and greater forms of distress. And what can happen with distress is you can have students who come to school but don't want to stay at school. You can have students who miss school, who have many absences, and you can also just have students who struggle in general. So uh, the question is really, how do we communicate with our young people when they're feeling this way? And part of the problem that we face as adults in their lives, whether we're parents, whether we're school staff or administrators, is that we have a responsibility for our children to go to school, don't we? We have a responsibility that they should complete certain hours of schooling per year, and that's in order for them to be able to pass to the next level. And we feel to some extent the burden of that there's a pressure that we have to encourage them to be following that routine, to be following the norm. But when children are in distress, they're often not able to do that. And then what happens is we find ourselves as adults in their lives trying to coax them, trying to encourage them to fall in line. And the more we try to do that, of course, the less they're able to fall in line and the more stress they get. So it's really a question of how we drop our expectations and set our own agenda aside to be able to put ourselves where they are and to communicate with them in such a way as they have more authority in their own lives so that they can openly share what it is that they're experiencing, what it is that they want, and what they would like to be different in their lives. So I'm going to stop there, Tara, because I feel like I've just been talking a lot.
No, it's wonderful. Yeah, no, it's wonderful to listen to you. And I think, yeah, lots of that's been really thought-provoking listening. I kind of what's been coming to mind is what we can do in the here and now, in those moments where young people might be experiencing distress now. And then it made me think also to how, as you just described, how we might open up a conversation with them. And to be curious about how they might support themselves and how we might support them. But also it really made me think about how we model that as adults
Yes.
ourselves. And I was kind of thinking to myself, do we do that enough? We kind of get into these. I was just thinking about a young person that I was talking to at the beginning of the week that was very distressed about her mock exam results, so distressed that she was in such a high state of distress that it was palpable. She was really struggling. and, you know, gently inviting her to think about how she might take care of herself in order to be able to be in a better place, in, you know, just right there, right, you know, in that moment. And interestingly, when I spoke to her the next day, there was such a difference in I could really tell that she was calmer, that she was more relaxed. And I had asked her, you know, what's better, and she'd slept, you know.
Yeah.
She went
Yeah.
um to bed and slept for 10 hours.
Yeah.
And, you know, we were like, wow, so, you know, what difference did that make to you? I feel so much more relaxed. I'm calmer. What difference does that make to you? I can think more clearly. And so, you know, the things that I just, yeah, that we can model as the adults and the people, you know, in these young people's life, are giving ourselves permission to look after, you know, having breaks,
Mhm.
thinking
Mhm.
about our own, you know, self-care, and a balance, you know,
Yeah.
finding balance to be able to do the work that's required, to be able to be, you know, prepared, and but also within that to have space to have breaks and time, downtime. And when I was talking to her and I said, so what can you take from this? What's useful from having given yourself this opportunity? Well, you got to a point where you basically had to sleep because you're so tired and you're noticing the difference. What can you take from that? And she said, I need to give myself permission to have breaks,
Yeah.
and not to beat myself up about that.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, so you're going to give yourself permission to have breaks. How might you feel differently about that? You know, that might be more useful. So, you know, there's that kind of, how do we meet that need for that young person in that moment? You know, I
Yes.
was so worried about her and her level of distress.
Yeah.
So in that moment, and also what else do we do in the wider kind of context as, yeah, just our, what we can do to model that, so they see us doing it, you know, because then we could all be better,
For sure. For
you
sure.
know.
Well, as you're talking, I'm imagining this young woman as literally standing up against a brick wall. She has nowhere to go. She can't move, and that's where the distress is coming from, right? That feeling that there is no freedom to move. There is no freedom to do anything but feel really stuck in this dark place. And what you did is you gave her the freedom to step away from that brick wall and say, I have options here. I have opportunities. I can sit down, I can think about myself, I can think about my needs, and that's okay. And you gave her this opportunity to think about that. So even though she didn't have an answer, there weren't any great answers at the end of your interaction, she went home and gave herself the liberty to turn off that stress for long enough to fall asleep and stay asleep. And how beautiful is that,
Yeah.
right? And then to be able to come back after and talk about that. So, to give our young people this knowledge and awareness that they can talk about these things openly in a safe environment where they're not being judged, where they're not being told, hey, you better fall in line. Like, it's got to happen this week. You've got 3 days to figure this out, right? How many times do we actually hear things like that? Whereas this type of conversation that you had with this young woman was very different. It was a conversation about support and about celebrating her and giving her the space to help herself, to
Yeah.
help herself.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. Yeah, and again, as you're talking, I think sometimes, we can put that kind of, you need to do this, you've only got so long,
Yeah.
but also we can suddenly, when we see, particularly, maybe not in a professional context, but a young person or child that we have, that is in our family, or in our close personal network, that you see them in this distress, and they've been working towards this, and then suddenly, I think we quite often then go, none of it matters, it doesn't matter, it
Right.
doesn't matter how you do it, doesn't matter, none of it. And then it must be like, what? This is now it
Right.
doesn't matter. no
Yeah.
and in that moment, because you're so worried about them and their health and their, that it actually, I think suddenly it kind of can put things into perspective. Actually, your health, your well-being, your emotional well-being, your physical health, is priority here. That is priority. But it must be really when it is suddenly like, it doesn't, you don't have to pass these exams, it doesn't matter, we do. And again, it's, and in that moment, that might be useful. But again, I think if we could be preventative, if we can find a way to, rather than it being a sort of crisis response to that and that's why I think, how the culture of schools, and then, the culture of kind of communities, and, how that compassionate sort of communication, and if we can prevent getting to that point,
Yeah.
where it's like we're all so scared, and that it's like none of it matters anymore, but we can have a balanced. And again, I think if we're modeling that, if we're inviting that from the outset, that they can have that balance, and that they, again, with that permission to take care of yourself, so
Yes.
you can have a healthy amount of stress, because stress is there for a reason. It can be
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. But
so.
yeah, and it's also about changing the mindset of the adult, in the sense that, we want to be there to help our young people.
Mm,
We want to be there to help them shift their behavior, to help them shift their understanding, to get, to help to get them back on track, and all of those things. But what what we what we should be doing instead is helping them to help themselves.
mm, yeah.
Because, parents will say to me, well, Vicky, I don't know what to do to help. What can I do to help? And it's not about, we don't have to have the answers for our young people. We don't have to figure out how to help them. What we need to do is give, as you did with the young woman, to give them space
Mm,
to be able to help comfortably help themselves, and to support them in that, to be there, to help them, to guide them in their own
yeah.
journey,
Yeah.
right?
Well, what's really interesting as well is that in that situation, and it wasn't a safeguarding, I didn't have a safeguarding concern, obviously if it was, then I would have, yeah, gone to the head of sixth form and to the parent, but it
Right,
wasn't a
right.
safeguarding concern. But out of my, I put my hands up, out of my own concern for this
Yeah,
young person. I did think that I needed to, and I did speak to her about this actually, but I was like, I felt like I needed to fix it, and but because I was so worried about her, and I had thought, and I had run this idea past her, but I was going to talk to her parents. And I, anyway, it just transpired that I couldn't, I didn't. And on reflection, I'm really pleased that that didn't happen, because
right.
it enabled her to be able to come up with what she needed to do herself, for herself. And from that, being able to kind of notice what works for her and what she needs to do more of, and, you know, feeling more relaxed, being calmer, enabled her to be more hopeful. I mean, the things that she was saying the next day, I was just like, wow, you know.
Yeah.
And
And the stressful situations aren't going to go away
yeah.
necessarily. But then the young people will be able to find ways to deal with them a little bit better.
Mm.
And that's all we can really hope for, right? I mean, there are no miraculous remedies to these sorts of things. But it's just those little shifts that we're looking for.
Yeah, and I do think, you know, like as you sort of highlighted, yeah, in a, you know, there was lots of communication between her and myself over the course of the few days, but trusting in her ability, you know, to be able
Yeah.
to find a way to support herself, you know, that belief, I think was really, really important. And from that, you know, that the possibilities, the greater possibilities of her maintaining that, and her now knowing what she needs to do as
Yeah.
she kind of moves towards the actual exams. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you, Tara.
Thank you. Yes. A wonderful
And
conversation. Thank you. Yeah.
as always, it's lovely to connect with our listeners. And if you have any questions for us, please reach out, any questions or comments, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.